In the heart of Arimu Kingdom, where the golden sun kissed the roofs of mud-brick huts and the river sang softly through the valleys, there lived Princess Zimra, the king's only daughter. Her beauty was the kind that made poets lose their words and made young warriors fumble with their spears. Her skin glowed like polished bronze, her eyes sharp and fearless, and her hair, thick and dark, fell like a waterfall down her back. But if beauty was her gift, pride was her shadow. From the palace courtyard to the village square, Zimra carried herself like the world was beneath her feet. No one dared meet her gaze for too long. Her words could cut deeper than any sword. When her maid, Adoma, once accidentally spilled palm oil on her dress, the princess slapped her so hard that the poor girl could taste. Even the elders of Arimu, men whose beards had turned white with wisdom, trembled when she spoke to them. "Why should I bow to them?" she scoffed one day, brushing past the council chamber. "They are old, not gods." The villagers whispered that her arrogance would one day invite trouble into the kingdom. But Princess Zimra feared no one. One hot afternoon, the sun sat high and merciless in the sky, turning the dust on the palace road into fine, burning powder. Princess Zimra was returning from the royal gardens, her maid Adoma trailing behind with a basket of fresh fruits. Up ahead, by the side of the road, an elderly man staggered under the weight of a bundle of firewood strapped across his bent back. His robe was worn thin, his feet cracked from years of walking barefoot. He paused when he saw the princess's entourage and, wiping sweat from his brow, called out, not to the princess, but to Adoma. "My daughter," he said gently, his voice trembling with exhaustion, "please, help me lift this load for a short distance. My strength is failing." Adoma glanced at Zimra, unsure. But before the maid could take a step forward, the princess's voice rang out, sharp and scornful. "Are you mad, old man? Do you know who you are speaking to? That is my maid. You dare to command her like some street girl?" The man lowered his gaze, murmuring an apology, but Zimra wasn't finished. She stepped closer, her eyes flashing. "Do you think your age gives you the right to stop us on the king's road? Look at you, dressed like a beggar, smelling like smoke, carrying dirty sticks. And you dare speak to me?" When the man tried to explain, she shoved him lightly but firmly out of her way, the bundle of firewood shifting dangerously on his back. He stumbled, nearly falling to his knees. Adoma's face burned with shame, but she kept silent. After all, to speak against the princess was to invite trouble. And so they walked away, leaving the old man in the choking dust, his eyes dark with something unspoken. King Orhan of Arimu was a man of great wisdom and pride. His reign had brought peace to the kingdom for nearly 3 decades, and now, in his old age, his deepest desire was to see his only daughter married to a worthy man. "Zimra," he had told her many times, "you are my blood and my crown. But the crown must have roots. It is time you chose a husband, someone who will stand beside you and carry this kingdom forward." And so, the royal drums announced throughout Arimu that the king's daughter was ready for marriage. Word spread like wildfire, reaching hunters in the forest, traders in the market square, and warriors sharpening their spears by the riverbank. One by one they came. The first was a wealthy merchant, his robes shimmering with foreign embroidery, his fingers heavy with gold rings. But Zimra wrinkled her nose the moment she saw him. "You are too old," she said, not caring that her voice carried across the throne room. "I need a husband, not a grandfather." The second was a young, strong warrior, tall and broad-shouldered, his chest gleaming with the oil of preparation. But Zimra leaned forward, her sharp eyes scanning his calloused feet and worn leather belt. "Poor," she muttered. "You smell of sweat and dust. Go and marry the river, since you spend all your time bathing there." The third was a gentle scholar from a neighboring town, who came with scrolls of poetry and knowledge. But Zimra's laughter rang out before he could even greet the king. "Unschooled in wealth," she mocked. "What use is your learning when your pockets are empty?" And so it went. Hunters, princes from smaller kingdoms, rich farmers, even healers and musicians, All left the palace with their pride wounded. Zimra rejected them all. Some she called too dark, others too short, others too thin. One she dismissed because his teeth were crooked, another because his voice was too deep for her liking. Every rejection ended the same way, Zimra laughing, her head thrown back in mockery, while her father sat quietly on his throne, hiding his disappointment behind a stony face. To her, it was a game. To the kingdom, it was shame. She laughed at everyone who came, but she never knew something was waiting for her. The sun had barely stretched its first rays across Orimu when Princess Zimra stepped out for her morning walk. The air was cool and damp with dew, the smell of wet earth rising from the palace gardens. As always, 2 maids followed behind her, baskets in hand, and 4 royal guards trailed at a respectful distance. They had barely walked halfway down the royal pathway, a narrow road bordered by tall palms, when she saw him. An old man, hunched and frail, stood by the side of the road. In his gnarled hands, he gripped the handles of a large, soot-blackened clay pot, struggling to lift it onto a low wooden stand. The veins in his arms were taut, his breath ragged. Zimra slowed her steps, her sharp eyes narrowing. Where have I seen this face before? She wondered. The man paused, glanced up at her, and instantly lowered his gaze. That was when the memory came rushing back like a sudden gust of wind. "Oh," she said aloud, a slow, knowing smile spreading across her lips. "You again?" "I know." Before she could finish, a movement caught her eye. From the thicket of bushes nearby, a figure emerged, a tall, striking young man with skin like polished ebony, eyes deep as the night sky, and a build that spoke of strength and grace. His steps were sure, his presence commanding without effort. He walked straight to the old man without sparing Zimra more than a fleeting glance. "Father," he said warmly, "let me help you." In one smooth motion, he lifted the heavy pot as though it weighed nothing, setting it gently in place. The old man smiled with gratitude. Zimra's breath caught in her throat. "Father?" The handsome stranger was this old man's son? And suddenly, her tone shifted. "Oh, Papa," she said, stepping closer, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness. I was just about to help you with that pot. Truly." The old man said nothing, but his eyes, calm and knowing, rested on her face for a moment too long. The young man turned to her, his expression polite but distant. "I am Arel," he said, "son of Damo the potter." The name rang through her mind. Damo, the same old man she had insulted and pushed aside on the king's road. And now, here was his son, standing tall before her. The old man, Damo, studied her face for a long moment before turning to his son. "Arel," he said slowly, "do you know this young woman?" Arel shook his head. "No, father." "Should I?" Damo's voice hardened, though it never rose. "She is the one I told you about. The princess who pushed me aside on the king's road when I asked for a little help. The one who called me a beggar in front of her maid." The air seemed to thicken. The maids froze, eyes darting between their mistress and the old man. Even the guards shifted uncomfortably. Arel's brows knit together, and his gaze settled on Zimra, not with anger, but with a searching disappointment that stung more than any insult. For the first time in her life, Princess Zimra felt her cheeks burn, not from rage, but from shame. And yet, something inside her twisted strangely. She liked him. His voice, his presence, the quiet way he carried himself. She took a deep breath, then did something no one had ever seen her do. She knelt. "Papa," she said softly, her eyes fixed on the ground, "I was wrong. I don't know what came over me that day, but it was wicked. Please, forgive me." The maids gasped. The guards exchanged glances. Damo himself blinked, almost taken aback. Arel's gaze softened slightly, though his arms remained crossed. The old man finally sighed. "I am not God to refuse forgiveness. Rise, my daughter. I forgive you." She stood slowly, daring to meet Arel's eyes. A faint smile touched his lips, small, but enough to make her heart race. From that morning, their paths began to cross more often. Zimra found excuses to pass near the potter's workshop, and Arel, though cautious, began to speak with her. She laughed more genuinely now, and even Adoma noticed she scolded less. But just when the palace whispers began to speak of a possible match between the princess and the potter's son, something happened, something that would shake everyone in Orimu to their core. The great drums of Orimu pounded from dawn, their deep, rolling rhythm carrying over hills and rivers, summoning every ear to the palace square. The air was alive with excitement. Today was the wedding of Princess Zimra, the king's only daughter, and Arel, son of the humble potter. The square had been transformed. Women from every corner of the kingdom bustled about with steaming clay pots. There was spicy jollof rice, its grains glowing a deep orange from the perfect blend of tomatoes and pepper, each spoonful rich with the smoky flavor of firewood cooking. Mounds of soft pounded yam sat like white clouds on wide trays, ready to be dipped into thick, steaming egusi soup, rich with chunks of tender goat meat and leafy vegetables. Near the palace steps, an enormous roasting pit held skewers of suya, the beef sizzling as the seasoned oil dripped into the fire, sending up a delicious aroma that made even the royal guard's stomachs rumble. Bowls of fresh palm wine lined the tables, the sweet, frothy drink cooling in clay pots buried halfway in wet sand to keep them chilled. The people danced. Barefoot children clapped to the rhythm, their laughter ringing out like bells. Old women swayed with their wrappers tied tightly around their waists, beads clicking on their ankles. Young men leapt high in the air, their bodies glistening with sweat as the drummer's beats quickened. The king himself sat at the head of the feast, a smile warming his usually stern face. Beside him, Damo, Arel's father, wore a new robe of deep indigo, his chest swelling with pride. When Zimra emerged in her wedding attire, the crowd gasped. She wore a flowing gown woven from the finest silk in the land, the fabric shimmering under the sunlight. Coral beads adorned her neck and wrists, and her hair was crowned with a golden tiara. Arel stood tall beside her, his white tunic crisp, his shoulders broad, his smile calm yet powerful. The air was thick with music, laughter, and the scent of food so good it felt like the gods themselves had been invited. No one knew that before the sun would set, this day of celebration would take a turn that would freeze every smile and leave the kingdom in shock. The wedding feast had stretched deep into the night. The moon hung fat and bright over Orimu, bathing the palace in silver light. The last of the drums had faded, the last of the laughter had softened into murmurs, and the guests had drifted away with full bellies and tired feet. Inside the royal chamber, Zimra and Arel entered together, still laughing like two children who had just shared a delicious secret. She clung to his arm, her golden bracelets clinking softly. Her cheeks were flushed from dancing, her eyes shining from the wine and the warmth of the day. They closed the heavy wooden door behind them. Alone at last. "You looked beautiful today," Arel said, his voice low, almost playful. He brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Zimra laughed. "And you looked like a prince, even though you swore you were just a potter's son." He grinned, that easy smile that had melted her heart since the day they met. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, he scooped her into his arms and spun her gently before letting her tumble back onto the soft bed draped in white silk. She lay there, laughing, her head sinking into the pillows, watching him as he leaned over her. His hands pressed into the mattress on either side of her, his face close enough for her to feel his warm breath. But then, something shifted. The smile on his face changed. It was still a smile, but not the one she knew. This one was sharper, colder, stretching too wide, holding something dark in its curve. His eyes, once gentle, now glinted with a strange light, deep, shadowed, almost ancient. And then he began to speak. Low at first, his lips barely moving. Words she couldn't understand, rolling together like the hiss of snakes and the growl of distant thunder. His voice grew deeper, more deliberate, each syllable vibrating in the air as though the walls themselves were listening. Zimra's laughter faded. She blinked, propping herself on her elbows. "Arel, what are you saying?" But he didn't stop. His eyes stayed locked on hers, unblinking, the strange chant spilling faster from his mouth, like water from a broken gourd. The grin deepened, twisting into something almost inhuman. Zimra's heart began to pound. Her breath caught. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that she had never really known the man in front of her. Zimra's breath quickened as the strange chant filled the room. The air grew heavy, thick like smoke, and her skin prickled with cold. Suddenly, before her eyes, Arel's handsome face began to ripple, like a reflection in disturbed water. The smooth skin sagged and wrinkled. The broad shoulders narrowed and bent. The clear eyes dulled, sinking deep into their sockets. His clothes seemed to darken into rags, and in a heartbeat, he was no longer Arel. It was Damo. The same old man she had met twice before, first with a bundle of firewood, then with the heavy black pot. Only now, he looked different. His teeth were jagged and brown, his fingers long and clawed. A sickly smell of burning herbs clung to him. His smile spread too far, stretching his withered face into something grotesque. "Open your legs, my bride," he hissed, the words curling in the air like black smoke. Zimra's scream tore from her throat, but no sound escaped beyond the chamber walls. He threw his head back and laughed, a deep, twisted sound that seemed to shake the very bed beneath her. "No one can hear you," he said, his voice sharp with triumph. "I have sealed this room with my power." Her eyes darted around the chamber, desperate for escape, but the door and windows seemed impossibly far. She tried to push herself away, but his gaze pinned her in place. "Open your legs, my bride," he repeated, his laughter swelling like a storm. Zimra's voice cracked as she begged, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please, please don't. I'm sorry. I'll do anything." But he only drew closer, the stench of smoke and death thick around him. His laughter rolled on, chilling her to her bones. Finally he stopped, just for a moment. His eyes burned into hers. "You meet many strangers on your way," he said slowly, each word heavy, "but not all are humans. I am a witch. I can split myself into 10 humans, with different genders. I came to test you, and you failed. But now..." His lips curled into a final, monstrous smile. "I am married to you. Open your legs, my bride." The laughter returned, louder, heavier, shaking the bedposts, filling every corner of the room. And then, without warning, he pulled her into a crushing embrace. Zimra felt his body grow colder, lighter, until he was no longer there. He had vanished. Only the echo of his evil laughter remained, swirling in the darkness. Not everyone you meet on the way are humans. Some are shadows wearing human skin. Restrain from quarreling, fighting, and all manner of negative behavior while trying to defend your pride, because you never know when the one before you is more than they appear.